Rick and Rionette are now here in the exam center, where they are told that the results of the exam will soon be announced through their exam cards. If somebody passes, their card will glow intensely, and those candidates will be eligible for the next round. Anything else would mean that the candidate has failed the exam. Rick gets worried, thinking he might have failed the exam or not, since it's a while that his card didn't glow. But Rionette tries to reassure him that he did very well in his exam, so he doesn't need to be worried. Rick begins to think that she is a very nice person because she always tries to make him feel better, and if he was 10 years younger, he would totally marry her. But she also has her scary side, as she threatens to triple his training if he somehow managed to fail. A few moments later, Rick's card begins to glow, and he picks it up in anticipation and excitement. And he's glad to know that he has successfully passed the first stage exam. After that, Rick leaves the hall with Rionette, but as he is outside, a dreadful smell fills his nose. He looks over and sees a rich dude walking straight up to Rionette, and he immediately introduces himself as the eldest son of the Diarmuid family, Raster Diarmuid. Now, Rick has started to think that he has already dealt with the 2 Diarmuid family members, but again, another one came up to mess with him. Surprisingly, this time, Raster isn't here for Rick. He's here to shoot his shot with Rionette. Rick tries to introduce himself to Raster, but Raster wants nothing to do with a muscular middle-aged man, so he goes back to talking to Rionette and tells her how much he is in love with her huge jugs. Sorry, he meant to say personality and characteristics, so he wants her to come with him so she can become his second wife. And this is where it gets personal for Rick, since he doesn't want to lose his girl to someone like Raster. So he steps in front of him and says she is his girlfriend, so he has no right to shoot his shot on her. Hearing this, Raster stood for a second and looks down, then he sees Rick is holding an exam card in his hand, which means he is still an F-rank adventurer, and he finds it hilarious that someone like him in this age is still an F-rank adventurer. Rick tries to defend himself by saying that Raster is also a bit old for taking this exam, since he looks like a 25-year-old man. Here Rick is thinking Raster is also a contender around here. So Raster begins to laugh at him and says he is not here to compete with anyone, since he's already passed this ranks back when he was just 14. So he's actually an A-rank adventurer, and he is here as an instructor for the second part of the exam. Now, believing he has asserted some dominance over Rick, Raster turns back to Rionette and asks her if she would like to join him for the dinner or not. But Rionette shuts him down and says the only man she will go with is Rick. Now Raster becomes enraged, and he can't accept that he won't be getting Rionette to go with him. So he swears that if he ends up getting in charge of Rick's exam, then he will make sure that Rick will suffer as much as possible, and that definitely going to make Rionette love him. After Raster walks off, Rick prays that he doesn't have to deal with him during the exam. Then he notices that Rionette is still clinging on to him, so he jumps back with embarrassment, apologizes to Rionette for calling her his girlfriend. But Rionette says he doesn't have to be sorry for this, since he did it to get rid of Raster, and that made her really happy, because he's not a good guy, nor he is loyal to someone, because he already married and wants to make her his second wife just to fulfill his desires. So, she thanks Rick instead. Meanwhile, Raster filled with anger since he couldn't get Rionette to be his second wife, and furthermore, he lost her to a middle-aged man like Rick. So he feels disgusted. Just then, his 2 siblings came running up to him and said an old man was messing with them during the exam, while Angelica complains that the old man beat her in a duel and tries to make her his servant for the rest of her life. Although, she was the one who made the bet to begin with. Now the way that they're saying it makes it sound like they didn't do anything wrong either. So Raster is outraged that someone would dare to humiliate his family, but when he learns that the one who did this is none other than Rick, a strange grin on his face starts to show. While later, the mock battles are about to begin, and Rick is really nervous about it. But Rionette tells him to make sure he will hold back during the exam. Rick isn't understood what the hell she's saying. He still thinks he is not that strong now to hold back against the same level adventurers, even some of them are pretty strong as comparing to him. So, in this situation, if he tries to hold back, the other ones will definitely utilize this opportunity, and that'll going to lead him to fail. So holding back against them now will be a foolish mistake. Also, he has to worry about Raster, because he's not an easygoing person since how serious he was for putting him in trouble, so he definitely should be careful with him, because who knows what he's cooking in his mind. And it would be terrible if he becomes the one in charge of his exam. Just then, Rick and Rionette comes into a person named Lynx Larot, and he was looking for them so long to meet with, and he also says he will be the one in charge of Rick's exam. Hearing this, Rick instantly begins celebrating in no time, because that's the only thing he wants right now. Lynx goes to say that he was pretty surprised when he knew about Rick, that the man has quit his job to become an adventurer in his 30s. So he was wanting to see him. Now, here he is. But he's not here to say that this is a bad thing to do. In fact, he believes this is so inspiring that Rick still has the determination to work towards his dreams, and he can relate to it since he is also in the similar age. Lynx became an adventurer when he was 24, but in the last 20 years since then, he has only been able to achieve the B rank. So, if he wants to accomplish his goal to get to the A rank, he must work hard, and it's never too late for this. Seeing Rick working so hard for his dreams and goals has motivated him to do his best as well, and he is excited to test Rick in the upcoming mock battles, but he won't be going easy on him. However, around the corner we see Raster is hiddenly listening to their conversation with insidious thoughts in his mind. As Rick and Rionette went away, Lynx walks down the dark stairwell, and out of nowhere Raster shows up in front of him, with a proposal which doubles as a threat. At the same time, Rick and Rionette were waiting in the locker room, and Rick seems to be in a much better mood than he was earlier. Because he got Lynx as his instructor who supports him and admires him for his work. And furthermore, he doesn't have to deal with Raster anymore. But however, a few moments later, someone comes in to announce that Lynx Larat has suddenly fallen ill, so he won't be able to act as an instructor anymore. In his place, Mr. Raster has been assigned to take over their exam. Hearing this, Rick starts to freak out once more, and Rionette mentions that Raster must have pulled some illegal strings to make this happen, since he wants Rick to fail any way possible, and he also related to Angelica and Freed that Rick has already dealt with. So, he may be seeking some revenge on Rick. Now, the other examinees in the room also begins talking that how terrible it is to have Raster as their instructor, since he may be a dignified member of the Diarmut family, but he also known for how much he enjoys beating up F-rank adventurers. Every single year, he picks a particular adventurer to mess with, and does everything in his power to make them fail. Now, who knows which person has become his prey for this exam? Hearing this, Rick clearly realizes that he is the one whom Raster is preying on, and he's definitely the most hated one than any other of his targets before. Sometimes later, as Raster was outside tormenting a random examine, he fires a barrage of ice blasts and knocks the guy out, but just as he was insulting the examine for being so weak. His fun gets interrupted as he receives a message from the elite guard. Meanwhile, Rick is strolling around the corridor with Rionette sitting nearby. As his turn is coming soon and he doesn't know how he is going to handle, Raster makes him much worried about the battle. Rionette doesn't understand what Rick is so worried about, because he just only needs to beat Raster. However, Rick thinks beating Raster is impossible for someone like him, since he is a well-skilled and powerful A-rank adventurer, while he is only an F-rank adventurer, and also Raster is probably more powerful than the other examiners as well. Rick now begins to think that he will die if he faces Raster, but if he backs out, he will have to do 3 times more than his normal training again. It seems like Rick is breaking down, all in instant. So, Rionette kindly sits in front of him and asks him if he really isn't confident in his skills, and if he really isn't have faith in himself. Rick now says he sincerely believes that he is an incompatible adventurer since he switched to this job too late in his life, and every person is telling him that he is too old to do this. But Rionette tells him that he shouldn't let what other people think of him shakes his confidence. And he's wrong that everyone disbelieves him since she always believes in him, the party always believes in him, and she saw a fire inside him that is able to burn any challenges into ashes. Your dreams are bigger than your age, Rick. You have the thing that no one has, and that's your immense passion for becoming an adventurer. To become a hero, to conquer the evils. Now you cannot step back after all those things you have been through for this. Now, please have faith in yourself. Have faith in your skills. Have faith in those extreme unimaginable training you have been through, and have faith in your extreme hard works and struggles. You have to believe in yourself, Rick, because all that matters is that she believes in him. Rick's now feeling much better and confident in himself, and he thanks her for her kind words. He admires her support and trust, and he knows now that no one can beat him as long as she's with him. Just then, when they're talking, a cloak boy approaches Rick and offers him a free fortune-telling for his upcoming moments. Rick thinks for a second and agrees to accept the offer since he doesn't find a big threat in this thing, and it could be a fun game. So, despite this whole thing being really suspicious, Rick decided to go along with it. But however, as Rick is about to sit down, O.N.A notices a magic circle on the chair, so she tries to warn Rick that it could be a trap, but she ends up being too late as Rick is teleported away instantly. After that, the boy reveals his identity and we get to know that it's none other than Freed in disguise. Freed says he is quite pleased with himself for being able to trick Rick into falling for his trap. However, he should have planned to teleport Rick as far as possible. Maybe on another planet. O.N.A gets extremely angry and while holding him by the collar, she asks him where did he send Rick by his magic. Freed instantly refuses to tell her with arrogance in his face. So, O.N.A teaches this stupid kid a small lesson by cutting a tiny piece of his eyelash, stating she can cut him into pieces in a blink of an eye without a second thought if he continues to test her patience. Now, realizing she's not an ordinary woman and she looks even more powerful than Rick, Freed gets afraid by her dangerous look. So he blurts out in fear that his magic isn't that much strong. So, he can only be able to send someone as far as 100 meters at most. So Rick could be still nearby somewhere. Meanwhile, Rick has just appeared on the riverbank near the training center, and he is really confused about how he got here in the first place. Just then, some guys shows up along with the elite guard. Unfortunately, Rick is being told that they have orders to beat him, and they are the elite guards of the Diarmuid family. So Rick realizes that Raster and others must be behind all of this, and they don't want Raster to get his hands dirty, so they'll make it so Rick won't be able to participate in the exam. Rick calls them shameless for trying to interrupt him so that he misses his exam. But the leader of the elite guards stops him and slyly says it's just a small test they wanted to take from Rick so they can see if he is truly capable of participating in the exam or not. And among the elite guards, they have B and A rank adventurers, so they won't going to make mistakes in judging his worthiness. So, Rick starts to feel terrible because he has to fight multiple outmatched opponents at the same time, and it's totally unfair for him. Now he feels he is in a great trouble, and as he was pondering and worried about what to do, he notices 3 guys on the ledge nearby. After taking a close look, he realizes that they are his mentors and the senior members of his party. They scare him more than the elite guards themselves. His party members jumps down from the ledge and walks up to Rick and asks him why is he here when he has an exam to get to. So, Rick becomes concerned about those guys because no one here exactly doesn't know how bad it is if his main mentor Broston gets angry. So Rick, fearing for the lives of the elite guards, he makes up a lie that they are just trying to help him to get ready for the exam. So, Broston understands and offers to join them if they are doing training. But Rick knows how hellish it is to train with Broston is, so he tries to warn the elite guards to get everyone to leave before they get themselves killed. But the leader of the elite guards doesn't take him seriously and orders his men to kill Broston. But as one of them tries to slash Broston on the head by the sword, it gets shattered into pieces instantly. But Broston praises the guy for strengthening his body well, but he's disappointed that he failed to strengthen his weapon enough that it breaks so easily. So he needs to train even more on his skills to go much longer with him. Otherwise he will be defeated in a blink of an eye. Now the guy gets angry and decides to use his fists instead to beat him up. But Broston effortlessly grabs his hand, and as the man was so weak as for him, that guy's hand gets crushed unintentionally. So, Broston tells him that he doesn't need to worry because he can fix it since he can do healing magic to restore his hand. The leader of the elite guards now started to realize that they might have messed with the wrong people, and now they begin to grasp how powerful this guys are. While all this going on, O.N.A asks Rick if they are truly here to help him or they are here to pick a fight with them. Rick doesn't understand what to say, so O.N.A understands it and says to Rick that he will handle this for him in a peaceful manner. He then pulls out his machine gun and starts to shoot devastatingly towards the guards, leaving everyone fainted on the ground. Rick yells at him for killing everyone when he said he would resolve this peacefully. But O.N.A asserts that no one has died probably, and this is how he does the work. Then on the other hand, one guy tries to take Alice, or I say Alice, as a hostage to gain upper hand. But this guy has no idea how dangerous she can become, so even Broston tells him that he had better back away from her slowly if he doesn't want to die. But that guy doesn't listen, and at a time he hits her to get her to shut up, and his fate was sealed once he did that, because Alice proceeds to evaporate him from this world. The other members of the elite guards are shaken with fear and couldn't believe what just happened. But the leader has just figured out what is actually happening here, so he tells them the vampire girl is a prodigy who is the world's strongest mage or enchantress, despite only being 10 years old. Eliseret Drakel. Mizet Eldwarf is an elf who is so skilled that he can build technology no one has ever seen before. And Broston Ashork is an orc who has incredible and unimaginable strength and wisdom. And they are all S-rank adventurers, meaning they possess power beyond our common sense. On top of it, they are part of a party which consists entirely of S-rank adventurers. The leader can't imagine that he is getting to see such powerful people in person. So, now that he has, he decided to do the smart thing and forfeit his membership to the elite guard. However, the rest of the elite guards who didn't quit ended up having to deal with Alice. So, Rick just tries to ignore the screams of pain and tries to focus on his exam. After that, Rick makes it back to Rionette, who is finishing her conversation with Fried, and they soon find Lynx, who is beaten earlier badly by Raster. Lynx says, when he was going, Raster stopped him and asked him what his dreams was, and when he said he wanted to build a school for the kids back in his village. Raster said, "Oh, I see. So go back to your useless kids and leave my place right now." Then he beat him up for daring to stay at his place. Raster did this to get to Rick and make him fail as soon as possible. Rick now becomes very angry about Raster. So, while he was scared before, he now has nothing but the determination to beat Raster's ass. Meanwhile, the battle has just about to begin, and everyone is arriving at the battleground, one by one. At this moment, we get to see a young guy named Adolf, and he is looking at everyone to see their power level and mana. He says there are 4 cores of power in this world that are strength, dexterity, magic capacity, and magic control. Adolf was born with a special ability to tell exactly how much power a person possesses by only looking at them. To demonstrate to us, he looks at a random contender and sees that he is totally lacking his strengths. So as expected, sometimes later he gets taken out by Raster so badly that he had to be carried out by the Steckers. But when it comes to Raster, we see that he is a powerhouse with most of his core strengths. His mana capacity was so high that Adolf's eyes began to hurt slightly, since scanning strong people strains his eyes. As a result, when he begins to look towards Rick, his eyeballs started blasting in his head. Meanwhile, at the stands, Rick's former co-worker goes up to Rionette and introduces herself as Elisa Granger, and says she had seen her with Rick before. So, when Rionette tells her that she is a part of Rick's party, Elisa is overjoyed to hear that Rick has new friends, and since everyone was getting ready to watch Rick's test, Rionette invites her to join them. Elisa happily accepts her invitation and walks towards the seats, but in her surprise, she sees Broston here. Because he is an orc, and it is rare to see a being like him in this kind of places. Mizet invites Rionette to sit next to him, but Rionette politely declines, because his intentions towards woman isn't that right. Then he notices Elisa standing behind Rionette and asks her, who is she? So, Rionette introduces her as Rick's former co-worker, Elisa. Then, she greets them all respectfully. Mizet notices the huge personality Elisa has, so he eagerly offers her the seat next to him. But Rionette isn't going to let Elisa fall victim to Mizet's perverted intentions, so she dragged her from there and they both sit behind them. So, he says okay. Maybe I will taste her later. Sometimes later, Rick's turn comes out and he comes into the arena to face Raster. Broston asks Rionette how she thinks he will do in the exam. Rionette confidently says Rick will pass the exam without any problem. But Elisa doesn't think it'll be that easy, and she continues to say Raster is an A-rank adventurer and he's well known for using excessive force to beat down low-rank adventurers. But if Raster is just A-rank, then Broston is sure Rick won't have any problem beating him. As the fight is about to begin, Angelica and an injured Fried comes to cheer for Raster to teach Rick a lesson. Seeing Rick in front of him, Raster is a little bit shocked, since he sent his elite guards to beat him up, but how he came up to here. Raster pretends to seem like he doesn't know about anything, and it's not a big deal. Rick asks Raster why he became an adventurer, and what is his inspiration. Raster answers that he just did it for the status, and since so long as he has a high rank, he gets to beat up some losers like him for fun. He doesn't actually have to put himself in any danger, and he can show his adventurer card anytime someone questions his authority. Hearing this, Rick says if his reasons are really that low, then Rick says he refuses to lose to him no matter what he does. Raster begins by firing a level 1 ice spell at Rick, but he intentionally misses, but Rick didn't move an inch, so he mocks Rick for being frozen in fear. But the real reason Rick is standing still is because O.N.A had advised him to use the first minute of the exam to calm himself and observe Raster's movements. Now, Raster is getting ready to attack Rick for real this time, so he casts a level 3 fire spell at Rick. And Rick is also impressed by seeing Raster casting such level of spell so quickly, but he has to keep observing so he can't dodge it. Then the fire blast hits Rick, and he gets it head on, and while Elisa is really worried about him, Rick turns out to be completely fine. Broston tells Elisa that Rick is strong enough that a blast like that has no chance of damaging him. He explains the 4 cores of the mana capacity must be trained from an early age, otherwise one loses all hope of growing in that category. It usually has a time period to grow in a person, and that gets ended when the person reaches in his 20s. So since Rick became an adventurer at the age of his 30s, his mana capacity is not that developed, which is why he puts a lot of effort into training the other areas. Broston trained him in physical strength and had Rick do things like running between villages, but with 900 kilograms of ankle weights and some venomous snakes chased him through the forest. Broston did everything he could to build up his strength, and Mazette trained him in mana control. It's honestly surprising that Mazette didn't give up on teaching halfway through since he never liked working, but when it came to Rick, he wanted to make sure that Rick could put up some good magical defenses. Otherwise, he would have been turned into ashes by the time now. He also says O.N.A was the one who trained him in dexterity, and this makes her shock since Elisa thought O.N.A was a maid. But O.N.A says she enjoys wearing a maid outfit for fun. Rick put everything he has into learning from them. So he already possesses the power of an S-rank adventurer. Although he doesn't realize it because Broston always letting him into thinking F-rank adventurers were much stronger than him. As Raster is about to cast another spell, he begins to insulting Rick and Lynx for being too old to stick around in the adventurer's business. And as he says this, he throws every elemental attack in his archive at Rick. By the time he's done, he believes Rick must be dead, or at least severely injured. But to his shock, Rick survived all of that without a single scratch. Raster started getting annoyed by how resilient Rick is, so he decides that he will finish Rick off with his bare hands. So he casts a strengthening spell on his hands and legs before rushing towards Rick, but as he throws a punch, Rick counters with a punch of his own and blows Raster back. O.N.A's advice really paid off, since Rick has watched Raster long enough that he now sees everything he needed to counter Raster. While Raster does have a larger mana capacity than him, and also that's all he has, he never took the time and effort to truly refine his powers. So although he has the potential to be stronger than Rick, but as of this moment, Rick understands that he is stronger than him. Raster tries to pass off Rick's successful counterpunch as his fortune, so he is going to get serious and cast a full incantation to take Rick out. But though the spells look pretty impressive, Rick was able to block it with one hand, and even insults Raster for his sloppy spell execution. Elisa doesn't understand how Rick could possibly block a spell of that level with his low mana capacity. So, Mazette explains that Rick learned to have a great control over his mana use, so even Raster has more mana capacity. Rick can use 100,000 times less mana to match Raster's spellcasting. On the other hand, Raster's confidence is starting to falter, so he tries one last attack to prove he is stronger than Rick. But Rick is far too fast for him, and delivers a punch that forces Raster to use his Iron Body defense magic. By this time, Raster has realized that Rick possesses far more power than the average E and F rank adventurer. But he still claims Rick had just been lucky up to this point. But Rick isn't falling for any more balderdash he throws. He knows that everything up until now has been a result of his strength. And on top of that, Rick didn't even use any strengthening magic, yet he was able to overpower Raster. Raster realizes he can't trick his way out of this, so he asks Rick how he managed to become so strong when he possesses a very little mana capacity. Does he use some steroids then? But Rick feels insulted that Raster thinks he used some cheap tricks to get up to here. So, he tells him that it wasn't as easy as he's thinking. It takes so many sacrifices that he have to make to get to that level. He was thrown into a dragon's crater and wasn't allowed to leave until he defeated it. He got blasted over and over again with extremely powerful explosions, and then he was forced to swim through a quag of monsters until he choked on it. Elisa can't believe Rick survived all of that. But Broston tells her that he didn't survive all of that, since some of his encounters were so deadly that Rick wasn't able to survive. And there's time when they found Rick with his whole body gets fried like a patty, but Broston was there to heal him back to life. since Broston's healing magic is so powerful as long as it was applied in the right moment. So no matter how many times Rick ended his life, they always brought him back to life. That's how he managed to exceed his physical limitations. And it is honestly surprising how well Rick handled it, since none of them had any for his safety. So if Mazette throws him off from a cliff for training, and if he died, they just called Broston to heal him. The same thing happens with Alice's training and Rionette's training, leading to several life-ending injuries. Raster doesn't believe any of this, since even if there was a way for Rick to build himself to this level, what is the reason for him to train like that? What reason would he have to willingly put himself through a hell like that? Is this just to become an E-rank adventurer, which no one even cares, since he is that old? It's no way he can get some status out of it. Rick says he is not doing this for a cheap status gain. He is doing this because he has a dream of eventually killing the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Alsapiet, and becoming the greatest hero he always wanted to be, who saves the people around him. Raster begins laughing at Rick because he thinks the monster is nothing more than an old story, and Rick still believes in this. But in reality, the monster is very real, and the main goal of the Orichalcum Fist Party is to one day eliminate that monster completely. Raster doesn't believe that the monster even exists, and calls Rick dumb for believing in a children's story. But Rick doesn't care if Raster doesn't believe him, since his mission has nothing to do with him. Raster is tired of listening to his stories, so he says he will now end this fight once and for all, and uses a level 7 binding spell to hold Rick in place. He then begins the chant for the strongest spell he has in his mastery. With this, Raster believes the fight will be over, since there's no way Rick would be able to overpower a spell like this powerful. And no one has ever able to beat him when he gets into this form. However, Rick begins charging up a level 1 air shot to fight against him. So Raster begins to laugh at him and says a mere level 1 spell could never beat his level 8 spell. Yet Rick is still completely confident that his air shot will be enough to punch through Raster's Vine Giant. That's because Rick has used his air shot over 100 million times, so he knows how to unleash its full potential. On the other hand, Raster has used this spell a handful of times at most, so he hasn't refined it to its outmost capabilities. No one believes in Rick's claim of using that spell 100 million times, including Elisa, since it is physically impossible to do that in only 2 years. But Broston assures her that he is telling the truth, although he needed space-time magic to make it possible. Raster still doesn't believe in his saying, so he gets ready to smash Rick into the ground and finish him. But as he gets ready to punch him, Rick effortlessly snaps the binds on his hands and legs and clashes with Raster. Raster is sure that he had won now that he has landed his attack, but right then his vine monster started crumbling from Rick's power before finally being shattered into pieces and sending Raster flying off into the stands. But fortunately, he's alive, but his pride isn't. On the other side, hardly anyone can believe what they just saw, as an F-rank adventurer just defeated an A-rank adventurer. Although Rick's friends totally expected this outcome. So, that's it for today. Please give us some like, do some comments, and make sure to subscribe to join our growing family, and also click the bell icon to stay tuned with our latest uploads. The next part will soon be available on the right side of the screen, so click that video to see what's next. So, thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.